Welcome to the HR Uprising Podcast. This podcast series explores HR hot topics and challenges through conversations with relevant experts and real-life HR, learning, and OD professionals. The HR Uprising is about learning through collaboration and evidence-based action. We want colleagues to have the confidence and skills to rise up through their organizations by delivering real, lasting business value. Now, introducing your host, chartered psychologist, experienced change agent, entrepreneur, speaker, and coach, Lucinda.
Hello and welcome to this week's HR Uprising Podcast. And this week, we're going to have a conversation with a real-life HR professional just like yourselves. The purpose, as you know, is to have specialist topics, have conversations with experts, and so now's the time for us to talk to somebody who's actually doing the job. And Steve Graham is who I'm talking to this week, who is the Interim Deputy Director of Workforce and OD at Hertfordshire Partnership University NHS Foundation Trust. Oh my word, that's a mouthful. And he is someone who he's had a real career in senior HR roles within the NHS, to such an extent that he's also been in almost all the different types of NHS organisation that there are. So he's had to hit the ground running, make a good impression and perform in a number of interim roles. So that is something that you might be considering, being an interim, and I thought was worth exploring. So that's the subject of our conversation this week. I hope you enjoy it. Hello and welcome to this week's podcast, and I'm really excited because I've got a special guest. Today it's going to be a conversation with someone I've known a long time. His name's Steve Graham, and I'll let him introduce himself in a moment in terms of the role he's doing. But the main focus, and why I thought Steve would be really good to get on this podcast, is that he has been, I suppose you could say, a professional interim. And I think in terms of that, we talk about change agents. Actually, he has to go in to different organisations and make a difference on an ongoing basis. And he's been into many, many different cultures and had many experiences there about what works and actually what makes life really difficult. So I felt there's some interesting stuff to get here. Now, you may hear bird song in the background. In fact, you probably do. And that might be a bit of a distraction. I hope it's not. But we just thought that for a change, it happens to be a sunny day and it's after work on a Friday, and we thought we'd nip out and sit in a nice beer garden and have a bit of a chat, both on fizzy water. Unfortunately, no beer today, Steve.
No beer.
But maybe later. So this is, without further ado, let's go in and have a chat, and bird song in the background can be nice and calming. So welcome on to the HR Uprising Podcast, Steve. Thanks so much for joining us. Will you introduce yourself, please, and maybe just give me an overview of your current role and maybe just a couple of the other places that you've worked in?
Okay, so my name is Steve Graham. I'm currently the Interim Deputy Director of Workforce and OD at Hertfordshire Partnership Foundation Trust, which is a mental health and learning disability trust for not just Hertfordshire, but Norfolk, Bucks and North Essex. I've been there since September 2018. Before that, I've worked in South East Coast Ambulance Service, Central London Community Healthcare, Bart Health. So I've been around a bit.
A serious NHS pedigree there.
Yes.
All NHS. Was every role the same?
No, and interestingly, it wasn't all NHS. So my first sort of job was in the NHS, and I went to Glaxo as a research scientist and got into HR there. So I've been in the NHS since about 2000. And there's similarities in the jobs, but there's differences. Different organisation, but we tend to face the same challenges in HR.
And that's something that I think is really key to bring out for this audience. So as you know, the point of this podcast is really to help inspire people as to how they can achieve within their organisations, but also learning from other people's experiences. You know that my experiences, I've worked in lots of organisations with Actus, and yet you find people having the same challenges. So surely we can share some of the solutions. And you're saying you've met some of the same challenges in the different organisations you've been in, yet also they've been really different.
Yeah.
Really, really different culturally, I know, because we've known each other for a few years, haven't we?
Yeah.
And perhaps we'll touch on some of those and what that means in terms of your challenges. And just before we go there, though, I mean, you've been the most senior roles, haven't you? In terms of getting up an organisation, what would you say your secret has been in terms of becoming HRT Executive Director roles?
I think the most significant thing that I've had to do is gain credibility and confidence of peers as quickly as possible, and show them that I can be trusted. I know what I'm doing, and I'm going to advise and guide them in the right way.
And peers, you're talking other board members?
Other board members, but also, I guess levels below as well. So at the minute there's a deputy director. I've got peers who are deputy directors, and it's important that I have their confidence as well as the confidence of the exec. So just that, it's almost like a 360, that group around you, but outside of the HR function. So, the HR function has its role, as does the OD function, but my jobs are to lead that and in lots of ways just manage its reputation.
So it's very much about, I think, seeing outside of the HR function, sort of viewing your relationship with different departments.
Almost customer management stuff,
Yeah.
customer services stuff, identifying where the reputation isn't doing too well, what we're not doing right. A lot of it is about HR losing the people in its processes and helping the teams recognise, a bit like with an NHS trust, there's a service user or a patient at the centre of it. For us, there's a stakeholder or a employee who's distressed when they come to us normally. We're not there when we pick up the happy times a lot of the time, and recognising and being compassionate towards that.
So I appreciate that you've got people coming to you who might not be happy. So you've got to have that sort of empathy, that people skills there, but also you're saying you've got to have that trust, interpersonal skills and gravitas to be taken seriously. In terms of the skills that you've developed, do you have any tips for people in terms of developing those? You know what it is you do to... Because they don't all come naturally, do they?
I think the empathy one is quite key. I remember when I first started on this, I failed for a few roles because I was described as not having enough gravitas, and I never understood what that meant, and I still don't understand what it means, but people now describe me as having gravitas. So I've obviously developed something, but I don't know what it is. I think it's maybe authority, confidence in what you're talking about, and being right. And if you're not right, being humble enough to say, yeah, okay, I wasn't right on that.
So it's being sort of authentic,
yeah,
giving it a go.
Yeah, that authentic leadership, I think, is really important. The problem is you can't often get things wrong and get away with it in this sort of job.
Well, I bet you can't as an interim.
No.
And you've ended up having some interims that have extended to 2 years, so you must be getting things right a reasonable amount of time.
Yes, I think that helps.
Yeah.
And can you? Yes, you can clearly develop that skill, because I wasn't that when I started.
Do you think you've just become more confident in yourself, or do you think you consciously have behaved differently at all?
I think I'm pretty much the person I am at work as I am at home. So I don't think I could manage any other personality. I'm not built like that. I think I've just developed a portfolio that has given me the confidence. So having worked now in every sector in the NHS, as I say, from commissioning through acute trusts into mental health a couple of times now, there's nothing that really phases me. And I've been in, so I don't really come across new things. What you tend to find are an HR function that might have got a bit stayed in what it's doing, lost its way a little bit, needs a bit of leadership and direction, and that's what I've done, and I've picked up tips along the way on how to do that, quite outward looking, and ways we can do different things. So bringing that all in is quite high impactful, because it opens up a world for people who hadn't been exposed to that kind of stuff.
So that's coming from the fact you've had the different experiences, and you're able to bring a different experience to each new role with the same problems, yet different cultures.
Yes, without doing any networking.
Yeah, and you've got to hit the ground running. So if you think about, you're going into a new interim role, and you'd say people, they talk about the first 90 days, but I reckon you don't have 90 days in an interim role to make an impact, do you? So if you were saying like the first month, what sort of things have you found that you do to hit the ground running? Connections
really quickly. Connections with peers at whatever level I'm working at. Quick connections with my boss, whoever that may be it a chief exec or the director, and then really understanding what the team are doing. So it's actually spending time sitting next to them as they're working, seeing what they're doing, understanding how they're doing it, what their tasks and challenges are, and trying to piece that all together so I get a rounded feel as to how the organisation views the team, how the team views the organisation, and how the team views itself. And then from all of that, putting together what I think needs to happen or what I know now needs to happen to fix stuff, because there's always stuff that needs fixing. And most of it's not major stuff, it's just, as I say, a little bit of slipshod on something, or a little bit of loss of focus, or a loss of target, or whatever. So there's two things there. It sounds a bit like lots of listening. Yeah. At the start with, so listening to your team. Yeah, I don't do much talking.
I know it's quite uncomfortable for you. Normally I do all the talking, don't I? And then you're saying connections. You use that word connections with your peers. What is that? What are you doing?
Meeting and having that authentic conversation. So actually listening to what they're describing the HR function. So it's not on a personal level to start with. It's on a quite a factual, what's their experience of the HR function, what's their myths about the HR function and OD function, what are they delivering, what they're not delivering, and collating all of that. Any personal development is after that, because I'm there for a period that could be anything from 3 months to, as you've described, 2 years.
Yeah.
I'm not there to make mates.
No.
I'm there to do whatever the job I've been brought in to do is. So I need to get that information, and they accept that. I think now as the interim coming in, that's what I'm there for, and then a relationship can build after that if need be.
And do you kind of get a clear agreement of what the outcome is of that? I guess it's going into a role when you're interviewed for, they have a purpose to bring you in.
Yes, but then they're never very close to what actually
it has to be done.
Come across.
It's like training needs, yeah.
I'm brought in for a reason, and it's normally there's a gap in the management, or someone's moved on, or someone has had to leave quickly, and they need some immediate support. And it may be seen initially as a babysitting role, but it never ends up as that, because there's always stuff that just needs to be managed and improved.
So it sounds like there's a good level of reading between the lines. So people tell you they need you something, but then you really have to get underneath it and diagnose what really is going on, where there isn't trust or where there are problems, perceptions of how your team is. I know that you might move in somewhere and you actually find there's issues with maybe members of even your team that you've taken on, fairly or unfairly sometimes. So you've got to really understand what's real and what's not.
Yeah, because everyone comes with a history, don't they? And if you work on the presumption that everyone goes to work to do a decent job, if they're not doing a decent job,
why not?
Yeah. The system may have let them down. Their previous management may have let them down, or they may be in the wrong job.
Yeah.
You can't just say that they're a bad one. And it's not very often you come across real patterns. They are just something hasn't worked in their environment.
And I know you've built some really strong, loyal teams. So what sort of things, obviously you said you start by listening to them. What other things might you do in terms of building a relationship with your team quite quickly?
Supporting them, I think, is a big piece of it. They don't know me.
No.
And the word interim means different things to different people, and in the NHS it's not always a positive thing.
Yeah.
There's not always a positive experience of an interim, someone who comes in just a couple of months and takes the money and goes, and I try not to be that. So I try to show true leadership and to the team, and often decide or describe the role I do as leadership rather than management. So try and help them understand where we need to be, but they have the ideas, so engagement with them, giving them autonomy in lots of ways to grow and make their decisions and try out things themselves, obviously within defined parameters, because we don't want to go wrong. So, but I think once I show that level of support and interest in them, and we get an understanding, then it becomes easier. And they see that I'm there to support, not to do a hatchet job or anything else.
So it's another building trust thing. So just being genuine and supporting and showing them that you have got their back. You're not here to mix things up for the sake of it. It's just doing what you say you'll do.
But I'll call it if it's not right as well. So they'll know that if I do come across stuff that they're not doing that's right, I'm not going to let them get away with it.
And how long would it take you to decide? You'd say this isn't. You'd sort of do the class. Well, how would you manage that in terms of calling it? What is that?
It's an ongoing thing. It's a coaching style of meeting with individuals on a regular basis, setting standards of work, and if it's not that standard, trying to understand why and trying to support and guide them. Because I work on the presumption I'm going to go, and they need to continue to do the job.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be their manager forever. Any relationship we have isn't going to go in a work sense forever. So if they're off the pace, they've got to pick it up. Otherwise, when I go, they're going to be exposed.
Yeah, so it's got to be quite a clear coaching style, really setting expectations, but setting people up to be autonomous.
Yeah.
And you want to leave the place better than it was when you found it.
Yeah.
So it's quite direct, but supportive style, I'm guessing.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I think my style. So when I first started in the NHS, which was in an interim role, when I think back, I was very directive. But I think one of talking about what's probably evolved is I still can be that, and there are times you do definitely need to be that. But the coaching element of it and the helping people see the solutions themselves is far more powerful for me and for them.
Yeah, I can see that. Okay, so then the other thing I'd like to just explore with you is the whole concept of culture. So, I'm quite interested in change, and, generally you're going in interim and you've got to put things in place or make things happen, and you experience different cultures. Now, without naming any names, could you give us an example of, a challenging culture or something that you experienced, to give us an example of something, and then maybe what you tried to do to adjust it?
So I think that changing culture is the most difficult thing.
Yeah.
And part of the downside of being the interim is never having been anywhere long enough to have affected a change. So you can identify things are wrong, but if you're not in there for long enough, and therefore you haven't got the, I was going to say credibility, you're still the interim. Then to
you haven't got the time either. You can't necessarily see it
to be
through.
that change agent, but not just the time, but to be the change agent that people recognise as, and they don't just think, he's going to be gone in a couple of months, we don't need to listen to him.
But you said you've had success with the HR team. Was it the same sort of thing where it's about building trust and getting them doing the right things?
Yeah, and making them feel like they had value and they could see the end. So quite often, in just about all the organisations, the team have been working really, really hard, but not necessarily on the high impact things or the right things. Okay. So, well intended, but not necessarily focused on what the organisation needs. Once you get that focus clear and they understand the end game, then it's a lot easier job for them.
So it's clear leadership again, classic leadership. It's about you seeing the wood for the trees, which possibly is easier as an interim because you come in with a fresh set of eyes.
Yeah.
Okay, this is where we should be going, and you're able to refocus people on what's important and then do some coaching to make sure that they're on track.
Yeah.
And hope they will continue on that way when you go. And you might find 3-5 years later, actually, over time, because it is a tanker, an NHS organisation. The culture does evolve.
Yes.
But you need that continuity. You got to start with that stone in the ripple in the middle initially. So, in terms of, you've been interiming 5 years. How long have you been?
No,
longer than that.
2000. Yeah, so 9-10 years.
Gosh. Okay. Why did you decide to interim in the first place?
So I had a substantive role, which was deleted as an organisation changed its style. I was made redundant, and I just drifted into interim, and seemed to take to it. And for whatever reason, those assignments became longer. So I think in the beginning there was a couple that were like 3 months or 6 months, but since then they've been 9, 12, 2 years, and it just seems to be where I am.
So if there's someone listening to this now and they're thinking, actually, interim could be the way forward for me, I imagine it might suit some people and not others. Would you have a sense of what makes a good interim, or who would suit interiming?
Yeah, I suppose 12 years ago, 11 years ago, I wouldn't have thought I would have made a good interim. I wouldn't have thought I had the natural outgoing. I'd say interims as being naturally outgoing.
You're definitely a natural introvert, aren't you?
Yeah.
And so, recharging tightly.
Yeah, and so that whole going into places and making an impact was alien to how I saw myself, but a skill I've had to learn and develop that first impact stuff. So don't be put off by that if you don't think your personality style is what you assume an interim to be. But I think, I suppose now I look at it as probably two sorts of interims. There's those that just go in and do the 3-month short, sharp, holding or quick impact stuff, and then there's the longer term ones. And so I'm probably, because I'm doing the longer term ones, I'm closer to where I thought I was going to be, which is in a 2-year interim or a 1-year interim, as long as some people spend in a substantive role. So that sits with me quite well. There's a thing about security, because you haven't got your next job always lined up, so you've got to be aware of that.
Yeah.
Put
some money aside then.
Yeah. Definitely do that. The bit I don't like about the networking and making sure that you've got a network to help you find the next job. So it's been good to me. I can't complain about it.
I've got a theory. You know, is it the power of I? Is that the intro thing?
Yeah.
Is that what the term is? You know, and like as extroverts, that I would be the sort of person who goes bounding in and exhausting. But the power of I wonder whether actually your introversion, by actually embracing that as being part of your secret of credibility when you were talking earlier, because the fact that you are more considered and less of the sort of, what is it, Flash Harry type thing, you've gone in, do you think that actually being more reflective has made you more, I guess, trustworthy almost, or have more gravitas?
Well, maybe that's where the gravitas has come from, that I've learned how to
embrace
use that.
your introversion.
Yeah. Once I recognised what it was, and I wasn't just that I didn't have a personality. So yeah, it could
just
be.
well hidden.
Yeah, well hidden and only revealed to certain people.
Yeah. Okay, so I think that's quite a good theory, that actually it doesn't matter about your personality, but make sure you're reasonably comfortable with risk, or be at least very sensible with money, because you can therefore go for periods of time without appointments. So those are worth taking forwards. And it's not about necessarily going in and being, you know, really, you do want to go and make an impact, but it needs to be a considered impact.
Yeah, and that's the challenge, isn't it? If you've got a 3-month assignment, unless it's very clear what that assignment is, the tendency would be to go in and try and make an impact as quickly as possible, and that's not necessarily what they need.
And that actually also, I think that resonates with what you were saying earlier about you go and build a relationship with the team. So someone who goes in and is kind of bang is more likely to appear to be a threat to those in place. So therefore you might, even in a good culture, you might actually get people to resist you. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you go in and you're sincere and more considered, then I think that's going to get more out of your team, really. Even though you might be there to make a change, but it's doing that and taking people with you. So that considered approach. All right, so that's good food for thought. I think that seems like a reasonable theory. So in terms of my next question, on this HR uprising theme, so where you've seen people come in and you've seen that people at all levels, but let's say someone entering in a more junior role, what do you think the skills are that they need to learn or display to be taken seriously in order to progress, if that's their aspiration?
I suppose that the people that you see being successful and getting on and coming through are those that have got a sense outside of just their HR specialty. So they're an expert. They're a subject matter expert in whichever field, be it employee relations or OD or learning and development or whatever. But they also have a connectivity with the wider organisation and understand, certainly the NHS, understand the politics and the interdependencies.
So that's the thing that we're often accused of not being strategic enough. It's not so much about having a strategic plan, it's about seeing outside of your silo or your specialism and the connections and the impact.
Yes. And I think one of the things that I've probably learned more than anything is to become part of the glue that connects a finance team to a clinical team to a IT team, and be the person that makes that all work and identify things that we can do from the HR and OD function, but also where they need to be working closer together and trying to bring those sort of teams together as well. So in terms of people coming through, you know, getting really well grounded in whatever their specialism is, understanding the general nature of the HR and OD function, but certainly understanding the organisation. You know, that whole thing about a seat at the top table, well, you only get that if you're a corporate director. You are wider than just your HR director. And it was, you know, chief exec once described to me, a corporate director needs 3 eyes and 3 heads, because they just have to watch everything all the way and learn everything and be aware of everything, not just their speciality.
So sort of 360, is that what the 3 is going on to? Eye in the back of your head as well?
Yeah. Okay. Just watching out for everything and spotting signs.
That's not waiting for someone to stab you in the back.
Well, it could be. Okay. Certainly could be. It's a cutthroat business.
Interesting thing. This is, can I just ask a controversial one that just popped into my brain? And we can always edit it out later if you want to. I was just interested, in the NHS is probably one of the few places that you see, compared to other organisations that we work with, where there's actually more females, CEOs. I don't know, what's your thinking on that? Is it more supportive of women, or is it just more women work in the NHS?
It's probably a bit of both. I mean, when you look at most organisations in the NHS, they're 70% female.
Whereas it's flip, probably.
Yeah. And so that, by its very nature, I mean, you know, we used to have a glass ceiling, gender-wise. It's breaking down. There's still more male CEOs than there are female, but, you know, certainly over the last 5 years, I think that's been a bit of a sea change. The issue now for the NHS is in terms of ethnicity.
Okay.
So we have.
Actually, I see a lot of ethnicity in the NHS, but not senior levels. Right.
Not at lower levels. There's very few directors. There's very, very few CEOs. It flips at sort of the mid banding levels, whereas with gender it tends to go all the way through. And certainly where I am now, we have a 70% gender exec and female exec, and probably similar non-exec as well, which is the most representative.
Representative of the population.
Yeah.
So, and what's the thinking on diversity and ethnic diversity in terms of improving it?
It's a big thing. I mean, if you think about our workforces, certainly in service use in sort of patient-facing areas, could be 50-60% from a BME background, and then it just flips because they are less likely to be promoted. They're more likely to go into disciplinary action. And there's some cultural pieces there that we're getting to grips with. We now have the Workforce Race Equality Standard, which shows us quite clearly that there's a long way still to go when it comes to ethnicity and fair treatment for all. And we're about to start some sort of work on disability as well. So all organisations in the NHS are paying attention to this. There's a national sort of drive around it, and a lot of it appears to be around just having a just and inclusive culture, and just ensuring that decisions are made purely on facts. And if two people were to make a mistake and it was the same mistake, you don't penalise one because of their ethnicity, and that's kind of the way it's...
So that is unconscious bias, I guess, basically, being that awareness. Okay, so there is a real awareness of that, and actually to make sure that is fair and just at all decision making. Are there particular areas where you mentioned a few? So recruitment or sort of performance. Are there any particular areas where they see it's a problem?
The two experiences that people tend to when you look at the data. So if you look at a recruitment process, you get a certain number of people come into the organisation and then move through. Promotion, you don't get that. When you can see it and you look at the numbers, you don't get that many BME staff being promoted through the higher bandings, even though they're going for the jobs. They're just not, and it could be that their culture doesn't allow them to engage and perform in our interview process.
Yeah.
So they're modest, or they're more reserved, so they don't come forward and do the I that we expect in our interview process.
I think that's really interesting, actually. The NHS is sort of really getting to grips with that, and actually probably ahead of some other industries, if you like, especially because you've got the more of a gender equality, and now looking at the broader ethnic equality. And then one final question, Steve. I was thinking, so if you've got someone listening to this who's thinking, actually, I'd quite like to get into the NHS. If you remember many years ago, that was something that I was very interested in, working with the NHS, because I have family members that are in the NHS. What do you think? Because I know you've had some people who, you yourself have been in corporate work to Glaxo. What do you think someone from non-NHS can bring to the NHS, or what do you think they need to adapt to survive or to be effective in the NHS?
I think anyone can bring anything to any organisation. Bringing non-NHS people into the NHS brings a different set of lens, and that's got to be valuable. So I don't think there's any particular skill set or any particular experience, because, to be honest, in the NHS you get experience of just about everything. The thing that I think people struggle with is some of the bureaucratic madness that we have to go through, some of the reporting to the centre, some of the controls the centre put on us, some of the lack of autonomy that we have. So even in the really high performing organisations, we are still reporting on a regular basis, and that becomes an industry, and things just get carried away with that. So that's the frustration, I think, for non-NHS people coming into.
And say, I must admit, I remember you talking about like board report. In order to put things forward, you have to. A business case is quite a lengthy document, isn't it? And reading a lengthy.
Yeah, but it's all public sector. It's all public money.
Yeah.
So it's not. So we're not a private organisation with some sort of equity fund behind us. We are using taxpayers' money,
so and we have to hold. It.
Yeah, justification.
Make
for
sure
it.
It's used sensibly.
Yeah.
Although I could be controversial and say that maybe that time spent writing that tome might be better doing stuff, but that's just my controversial opinion. That's why I'm not working in the NHS, I guess. Hope just with them. That's a fair point. Any other points that you'd raise in terms of
No.
Going from a commercial into, it's basically, it doesn't matter what your background, it's more about how you adapt to it.
And there's a bit of snobbery, isn't there, about, both ways, I think, trying to get from the NHS into another organisation. Oh, you're only in the public sector, what do you know? Well, hang on, we work to stricter guidance and governance than most private sector organisations, and coming the other way, you're not going to understand the NHS. Well, anyone can understand it, but it's whether you've got the patience for it.
Yeah, and tenacity.
Yeah.
I think to make it happen. Yeah, great. So, right, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it massively on a Friday afternoon. I hope for the listeners that the sound effects haven't been too distracting. It's nice to hear some birds in the background and aeroplanes and cars going by. So Steve Graham, thank you very, very much for taking part in our HR Uprising podcast. And we'll look forward to speaking to you again in future.
Okay,
thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the HR Uprising podcast. You can access more information, including resources or links mentioned in the show, at our website, www.hruprising.com. Also, you might want to join our LinkedIn community or tweet to us at HR Uprising. We'd love to hear from you.